There I was at this rally, and this, right, it didn't happen, it wasn't isolated. This is happening in the context of the worst massacre against Jews
Right.
since the Holocaust. And we have this horrible graffiti incident with genocide written all over the storefront windows, and I am standing there looking out at a crowd of 400 with other elected officials, but not my congressman. And in that moment, I just knew to my core that the absence spoke louder than any words.
Hey everyone, so excited to be here again for our next episode of Recalibration. My name is Daniel Rosen and I'm the co-host. For any of you who are just watching for the first time, Recalibration is about telling the stories of individuals and organizations who have been recalibrated by the events of October 7th and its aftermath. We all saw after October 8th lots of manifestations of anti-Semitism, and it shook so many people, and the reactions have been quite interesting and incredible. And we're here to tell the unreported story, the positive stories about how people have found a new sense of belonging, a new sense of purpose. And I'm really excited and honored and really happy to have my two guests with me today. We have Davida Fried, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, Daniel.
My pleasure. And Diana Lovett.
Hi,
welcome.
thank you.
Welcome. And these two individuals are really special people in that they decided to take an issue here in Westchester County into their own hands with others, and they really made a huge impact. Before we begin, I just want to give a quick background on my two guests. Diana has if I say something wrong, please
Yes.
forgive me, has a master's in from Cambridge University, and another graduate degree from Yale University. Undergrad from Yale. Very nice, very good. She's also been a lifelong strategist, and she is the co-founder of Westchester Jewish Democrats and the co-chair.
Yeah.
And Davida Fried also is a very important volunteer for Westchester Jewish Democrats. She's also the regional director of NYC Teach NYS. And she also has a master's in education and was a classroom teacher. And I want to thank you both for coming. Thank you. All right. So we're just going to jump right into it. So I have a few questions about, so in the last year or so, there were two really important elections in Westchester County. One having to do with Jamal Bowman and George Latimer, and the other just recently, more local, having to do with Jessica Klein and Ilana Jacobs. And both of those elections were won, thanks very much to the efforts of the two of you. And so we want to talk about that and tell that story. We're excited for that. But before we do, if both of you could sort of give us your background, how you came to this moment. Why don't we start with you, Diana?
Sure. Well, thank you so much for having me. So I worked in politics professionally early in my career, and I don't work in politics professionally anymore, but have worked as a volunteer on local races since 2021. So school board and town, city council, and at the county level, and have really enjoyed working at the local level. I think it's very impactful. So my journey to being involved in George Latimer's campaign was actually, a big shift from where I was in 2022. So I used to be a supporter of Jamal Bowman, and I was a fan of his, and we were close, and I was very concerned about some of his positions, and had tried to talk to him, and specifically the week of October 7th, we did talk, and I expressed my deep concern about some of his statements and some of his actions, and made some recommendations of how we could. I was saying, I'm on the bridge, like take a step towards me. Here are 3 ways we could move forward together, and he was not open to that, and I think very steadfast in his belief that he was, where he was coming from. And, I was very open with him, and especially when he was one of only 10 congresspeople to not call Hamas a terrorist organization, I just knew I couldn't support him anymore. So I went to a breakfast that he organized for members of the Jewish community. And I wanted to share with him in person why I could no longer support him and why I didn't think that he was representing, all members of his district. And I met other people there, and this was long before George Latimer ever entered the race. So I just directly expressed my concern, to him, and then subsequently to New York Times and other outlets. And then, I'd known George as a very dedicated public servant. There's no one who puts more like kind of shoe leather into serving constituents, whether it's coming to block parties or the opening of a business or, helping people with their problems. So when George decided to run, I signed up to volunteer, and I did some of the, OG political stuff, door knocking and phone banking. But I think because of my background as someone who had, kind of made a shift, I also did a lot of kind of like press and media on behalf of the campaign. So was thrilled when he won, and I think it was exciting to see all the different people who came out to support him. It was the Jewish community for sure, but he had support, from a very diverse coalition, people from all walks of life, Black folks, white folks, Hispanic folks, people of all backgrounds. So
it's really interesting to hear
Yeah.
that story.
Yeah.
How you really came all the way
Full
around
circle.
from that.
Yeah.
That's really fascinating.
Yeah.
That and you really tried your best to be that bridge.
Multiple occasions.
Multiple occasions,
Yeah.
wow.
So I was earnest in it, and was very transparent, with him, publicly, privately. So I know I tried really hard because I foresaw that this would be an extremely divisive primary given the demographics and the dynamics of the district, and I didn't want that to happen to our community. I think there's so much that unites us, in Westchester and the part of the Bronx that, is included in our district. We have real issues to address. We have flooding, as we saw with Ida. We have aging population here. We don't have enough young families. We don't have enough housing. Like, there's real issues. And I think if we can work together, and so I just really didn't want something that was super divisive. So I was very earnest in, trying to avoid that happening, and unfortunately it was very divisive. Yeah.
So we're going to get back to that.
Yeah.
We're going to get into the story. Davida, tell us a little
Sorry,
bit
I'd
about
love to
yourself.
hear all about your background, Diana. I just want to clarify, I don't volunteer for Westchester Jewish Democrats,
yeah.
but I maybe one day. It sounds really exciting, the work that you're doing. So we'll have to talk after. So my background is not in politics. My background is in education. I have my master's, and I was a classroom teacher, and I worked my way up somewhat quickly to administrative work, which I really thoroughly enjoyed. And the story of how I ended up here is the story that I have to tell of working in this non-public preschool in Yonkers. And sadly, as we know, October 7th was not the first. It's not going to be the last time that we've had horrific violence against the Jewish people. And it was actually, there was a different horrible incident that had occurred in Muncie. There was a stabbing. It happened at Hanukkah time, if this rings a bell.
Yeah.
Yes.
And part of my job, of course, which was giving tours to prospective parents, every tour went from tell me about the curriculum, tell me about the opportunities of education for my child here, and it flipped, and it went to talk to me about security, talk to me about safety, every single conversation. And I had parents who point blank looked at me, and the very first thing was, if we're not sure our child is safe, we cannot send our child here. And we very quickly had to come to terms with the fact that we didn't have good enough security for our school that made the parents feel safe enough to send their children, and we could have the best teachers in the world and the most amazing curriculum, and it didn't make a difference. And we didn't have the money. We couldn't possibly afford. And through my dealing with this nonprofit, Teach NYS, which helps advocate on the state level for funding such as security funding for the non-public school population in the state, which is a significant population. There's almost 400,000 children across religions and not that are attending non-public schools in the state. A demographic that needed to have a strong voice. And what's been really nice to see is that our legislators, many of them are receptive to hearing what the needs are in this community. and strongly believe what we believe, which is that strong public schools and strong non-public schools go hand in hand and create a really healthy, good ecosystem for our state. So I had the pleasure of moving from that position into working as the regional director for this nonprofit. And it was shortly after I started the job. I guess it was after Labor Day. It was the fall time, and there was an election coming up in November. And it was one of my first days on the job. And I was handed a box of 300 lawn signs, and they said, "Go put up the lawn signs." And the lawn sign said, "Get out and vote." They were nonpartisan, we're nonprofit, and I couldn't for the life of me connect the dots. And I said, "What does advocating for our?"
What year is this?
We're going back to 2021.
Okay.
2021. I go, what is the connection? I want to talk to our decision makers and our policy makers, and I want to be a voice for this demographic, which I grew up. I went to non-public school, and now my children are in religious non-public school. And I go, I can't connect the dots. Tell me how putting up the lawn signs, and I'll do it. But explain it to me before I drive all over town. Of course, right? As the saying goes, our elected officials pay attention to those who vote. Mm-hmm. And we cannot have a voice if we are not civically engaged. And it doesn't necessarily matter, or it shouldn't, who you're voting, right? As long as you're getting out and you're voting, that's what matters. And I'm very niche, right? I'm working for non-public school advocacy. But the point is, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what our concerns are, whatever they may be, whether it's crime or better sidewalks and flooding, which is actually very relevant to where we live in Westchester. Everyone's got to be civically engaged in getting out voting, and I totally subscribe to that, and I believe in that on a personal level. I always watch my parents, as a young child growing up in Boston, made it to every election. It was such a priority to them. So certainly it was a value that I was brought up with, but of course it somewhat changed post October 7th, and we're here to talk about a post October 7th context that all this is taking place. So I would say that a turning point for me was a few months after October 7th. It was January, just a few months later, and we had a really disturbing incident of vandalism right next to the shopping center, the Golden Horseshoe Shopping Center. Yep. If you live in there and you're Jewish and you go to that kosher, it's the only kosher supermarket, and highly frequented by anyone who keeps kosher and Jewish residents, but everyone, right? It's just a very highly frequented shopping
There's a good
center.
bagel store over there.
Delicious and the best. And I found myself.
By the way, you don't know about me. Are
you a bagel guy?
Whenever
Daniel?
I meet someone, I always want to ask them in relation to what bagel store.
What's your local?
By your house.
Okay.
That's my way of. Sorry. Anyway.
So we will put in a plug for Bagel Power. Yes. Excellent kosher bagels. So there we go. That's the first plug of the night. And there I was at this rally, and this, right? It didn't happen. It wasn't isolated. This is happening in the context of the worst massacre against Jews,
right,
since the Holocaust. Right. And we have this horrible graffiti incident with genocide written all over the storefront windows. And I am standing there looking out at a crowd of 400 with other elected officials, but not my congressman. Mm-hmm. And in that moment, I just knew to my core that the absence spoke louder than any words. Mm-hmm. But there were plenty of words, like Diana mentioned. There were plenty of words, but the absence spoke so loudly. And somewhat organically, we put up a table. We put out forms. In that crowd, I would say maybe 25. We must have had 25%, maybe 50 people came over to us and said, "How do I make sure that I vote in this primary? How do I make sure that my vote counts? How do I make sure that my voice is heard and it matters?" Jewish, not Jewish, people started coming over to us, and the message was honest. It was a nonpartisan one. It wasn't even about the candidate. Go do your research yourself. But if you want your vote to matter, then you need to be a part of. It's the New York State laws are a little bit restrictive. You've got to be a part of the Democratic Party to vote in the Democratic primary. Yeah. So I think that was probably a real turning point for me, and I really felt that I had a role to play, and it was amazing, like Diana was saying, to just see how many people came forward. Together in a statement against hatred and violence. And again, no words were needed. Just who was there and who wasn't there. And in that moment for me, it was totally crystallized who I felt was the right person to represent us and who wasn't. And we're very grateful that we had someone wonderful who supports our community run.
And so it's just so interesting to me, honestly, this organic recalibration that so many people have had.
Yeah.
The story you just told, I can tell my own story. For me, it was on October 8th, basically, where what we saw on social media and, what we saw when these rallies, how organized the other side was, basically blaming Israel for what happened when they hadn't even stepped foot into Gaza yet. And basically understanding that seeing people say things, like everything is Palestine, or Zionists get out of the subway and all that. I was just like, whoa, like where did this come from? Like how did this happen? And I can't I can't just sit on the sidelines any longer. Like I have to do something. And when I was a student activist, I was active 22 years ago, and then I graduated and I moved on. But then I just realized I became recalibrated myself, and I said I just can't not do anything. And then since then I was involved with the Latimer campaign in a very small way. First of all by voting, second of all by doing some canvassing, and then also with you guys just recently. So we've all been recalibrated, and that's the really the genesis of this conversation. So again, I'm so happy to have both of you here. Maybe if you guys want to just sort of continue on with the story about what were the next steps to really maybe get George involved and create Westchester Jewish Democrats.
Yeah. I was not involved in recruiting George. I mean, I thought he was great, but there was many high up people who made that happen. I think the reason that myself and Scott, my co-founder, really wanted to start an organization. It started with a text and it kind of snowballed from there. Is that
Scott? Tell us about
Dugan,
Scott.
Yeah.
Scott Dugan.
And we really wanted to, capture. We felt like we saw a recalibration of the Jewish community and enormously high amounts of civic participation. So people registering to vote and actually voting. And if you look at any of the numbers, since October of 2023, Jewish political participation is 80%. It's insanely high. When we have, you look at local races, oftentimes it's decided by 5-10% of voters. So to get a group that is participating in such a high level is really unique. And we didn't want that to, we wanted to capture that. Felt like there was an upsurge in civic engagement. As Davida said, my background is all in democratic politics, but I think for the Jewish community, we span, we're independents, we're Republicans, we're Democrats, but we felt like because we were based in Westchester and because it's such a big democratic community, that if we really wanted to be influential and, be able to help our allies and members of our community, that we really had to play in a partisan space because most of the main action is in the primary level. It's
Yes.
not really in November, it's in June in the primary. So our goal was really to kind of bottle what we felt like was an upsurge in enthusiasm, from our community and kind of try and codify it and make it so that we weren't reinventing the wheel every time. So there was a lot of amount of it that was hopeful, which is, people are coming out, they're registering, they're participating, so many people, and, Davida's organization did so much hard, people who'd never voted before or never voted in a primary before, but that's a lot of work to get that. And it's a lot of work to stand it up in short notice. So our hope was to kind of keep that energy going. And then we also, on kind of a less hopeful side, just foresaw that things were not going to get better, from a safety and representation perspective for the Jewish community. I think you talked about recognizing kind of things on social media. And, if I'm being honest with myself, there were certainly signs of that, earlier. I remember going to the Women's March and I was like, there's some weird stuff here that I don't feel so great about, even though I agree with the larger message. So I think there's always been a kind of nascent or, group on the far left and of course on the far right as well, that's made it, maybe not the most welcoming place for the Jewish community. So we also wanted to make sure that, Jewish political participation remained high, and that the Democratic Party, stayed a place where we felt welcomed and represented. So that was really like the vision for it, was to kind of to make an organization that was evergreen, so that every time we felt like there was a key race where our interests were at stake, that we weren't kind of like reinventing the wheel. Now we're still putting the puzzle pieces together, but I think it's gone pretty well so far. So we've mostly done a handful of endorsements. George was one of them, Mondaire Jones, and we really, the endorsements that we haven't even endorsed anyone from the Jewish community, because we also need to elect our allies. So yes. It's someone like George, who's Catholic, and Mondaire Jones is African American, from Rockland County. He ran New York 17, and most recently this week, Lakeisha Cohen's felony for city council president in Yonkers. So I think I'm really excited about it, because I think, as Davida said, participating in elections is exciting. It's great. I wish every single person did it. I wish all people. I think it stinks that voter participation is so low. So I'm happy our community is connecting and showing up consistently. I think that's really great. Yeah.
I feel like it's not necessarily a Jewish issue. Mm-hmm. It's more of a moderate issue versus a radical issue. Mm-hmm. And so, as you said, you guys haven't even endorsed Jewish candidates. Yeah. You're endorsing candidates that have moderate, reasonable views. Mm-hmm. And so it's about recognizing that if we leave a void to others, they'll fill it.
Yeah.
And so we have to step forward and bring our voice forward. Mm-hmm. Reasonable, moderate voices.
Yeah, absolutely, so. Yeah.
Totally, and if I could just, I didn't actually say the name of the campaign, but the campaign was called Westchester Unites, and it was intentionally, we put a lot of thought and effort into what we wanted to call this nonprofit, nonpartisan campaign. But the messaging was, right, that we are seeking unity throughout our District 16. And it was not a message that was only for the Jewish demographic, the Jewish constituents. And we never got partisan. We never endorsed or opposed either candidate. We hoped that every individual would do their own research and go out there and decide on their own who they felt would best represent them. The tagline was anti-Semitism is on the ballot. So going back to what you're saying, Daniel, which so deeply resonates and is true, is that yes, we felt that this was a fight for common sense and for moderates, and I look at hatred as something that is very extreme, and there should never be anything extreme on the ballot ever. And it's unfortunate that was the case. And I think we can kind of talk about how this led up to our very recent school board election. And I love how you spoke about how we were not necessarily seeking to elect Jewish members of our community. I think what you spoke about before about a lot of things happening organically, it was really exciting to see two members of our community step forward. It was also very exciting to see the others who ran. Maybe less so over time as some candidates came forward, whose values did not necessarily align with our community. But certainly there were opportunities for conversations. Diana, maybe you want to speak about that a little bit more?
Yeah,
at the onset of the candidates coming forward.
Yeah, I think, just also to echo what Davida said, I think, and I've been volunteering on school board races for a couple of years now, and I never can get over how low voter participation is. In most cases, you're looking at 5% of eligible voters are participating. And I volunteered last year for a slate of candidates in New Rochelle. It was like a very diverse slate, some incumbents, some new people. And I remember I was standing outside one of our elementary schools on the day of the election, and I was handing out like a stack of palm cards for these candidates. And I was like, don't forget, school board election today. And if you think about it, people are walking their kids into school, right? So it means they have kids in the public school. They either, rent or they own in New Rochelle. and they're walking by me. They have to pass the place where the polling place is to drop their kids off. And they'd be like, no, thank you. And they would walk by. And I was thinking, wow, this is like affects your children's future. You know, if you're a homeowner, this is your largest asset. And if you're a renter, this affects, you know, your how much you're paying in rent because, you know, the property taxes are passed down to you. So I was thinking, this affects your pocketbook. You know, this is like over half of what you're, you know, paying in local taxes. And it's about your kid's future, and you're not participating. And I really I found that so shocking. And voting is so easy; it's free. It takes 1 minute. So
it's such a privilege.
It's such a privilege. So I think what was so hopeful and what I felt so happy about looking back at the election this year is that it was such high participation. It was over 10%. It was up 60% over last year.
You're talking about the school
board.
Yeah,
the school board. Yeah, in the New
Rochelle
school board race. Yeah, that's amazing, right? And anytime you have a year-over-year increase, that's so big. I think that really speaks to, as you said, it's the Jewish community that came out, but it was obviously everyone, right?
Because you don't get that kind of. None of us
rise.
anticipated a 60%.
Yeah, that's
61%
bananas.
jump.
I think it comes back to this idea that people, at least in our area, realize that what young people are being taught is impacting the way that they think and the way that they act. That's an obvious connection. And so we can't afford to ignore what the curriculum is. We can't afford to ignore these things. And so it's part of this reawakening and re-understanding that, yes, these things are important. And I'll share with you both, I think you guys were there too. I was at the victory party, so to speak. I know a lot of people besides you two who are really deeply involved with this, and you guys are all they're heroes, by the way.
So many
heroes.
people. If we could just give a shout out,
Yeah.
there were so many
there were lots of
community
people who
volunteers
decided
that came forward from all over the district.
And I saw these people, and I know these people, and I know that none of them in the past would have been involved in this type of thing. I could speak for myself. I went canvassing. I went to the train stations. I did things that I never. And Davida called me. And you.
I really pushed a little.
Right? And I never would have done these kind of things. And it was because of this understanding. And first, I want to thank you both for really doing this and stepping forward, deciding to say enough is enough. And you guys did it. And thank you to both of you for doing it. Because of you two and others, you guys made it happen. It's something really special. And this is what I have to say. When we look back in time, I've often asked myself this question. When we look back in time and say, what did you do? Or what would you do if you were confronted in the past with some kind of problem? How would you, Daniel, handle it? And the way you guys answered that question is really so amazing. You guys are leaders, truly. Really.
I want to give credit to the candidates who ran themselves because I think they really deserve acknowledgement and recognition. And it's a 5-year term. It's a big responsibility to take on. And Alana, for example, she's got little kids at home. She's got a full-time job. So this is really, it's taking on a lot. And I want to say how enamored I was when I met both of them in person. Alana was by chance. I actually was at a Meet the Mayor of Yadira. It was very nice. She extended an invitation, and I went to the temple in New Rochelle or the Bethel rather, and of course the woman sitting next to me. We played Jewish geography, and we find our mutual friends very quickly, and Yadira's up there with I forget who it was, Matt Stern and the city engineer perhaps, and they're talking about the $20 million plus deficit, and Alana says to me, I'm thinking about running. I'm an attorney, and she talks to me about her credentials, and I go, we would be so lucky. We would be so lucky to have you with your incredible credentials run. And I said, I really hope you do, and you have my vote if you do. And I was so excited to hear when she actually decided, and she announced that she was running, and I gladly signed. So I really want to give credit to Alana Jacobs, who stepped forward to run, and to Jessica.
A lot of courage to run for office.
Oh, absolutely. And there was a lot of mixed feelings about the budget that was put forward, and there were a lot of job cuts involved that were deeply painful to all those involved, and of course not a lot of easy decisions to make, and it takes tremendous courage to say let's not harp on all the missteps, and let's move forward productively, and how can we course correct and do better moving forward, and how do we make sure that New Rochelle continues to thrive, right? Again, non-public and public schools together moving forward and supporting our beautiful New Rochelle community. and Jessica Klein, who stepped forward as someone whose children went through the New Rochelle public schools. Her daughter, which she very publicly spoke about at the panels, struggled with mental health issues, and her tremendous, and we're Jewish here, in Hebrew we say hakaras hatov, but her tremendous gratitude back to the schools, and that she stated, this was my time. My children are out of the house now, and this is my time now to give back, which is a Jewish value and concept, to the schools. And I'm just so happy for them that they had this unbelievable, certainly our community mobilized, but we know it wasn't just our community. It was incredible turnout across the districts of New Rochelle. And of course, we know there is no such thing as the Jewish vote, right? It doesn't really exist. So while I'm so happy to see that our community I believe they stepped forward and voted. It was so nice to see all of New Rochelle stepping forward. And like Diana said, that 61% surge. So I think across the boards, it's been so wonderful to see the heightened level of civic engagement.
I hope it keeps going.
And I hope it keeps going. And I hope it keeps going.
And they like you all did your battle. Now they have the next 5 years to really be engaged and to deal with all the issues in front of them. So they have a big job for them.
Yeah.
And so I guess that leads us to like maybe the next and maybe closer to the last point, which is, how do you guys feel when you think about the future? When you think about this election, and how it maybe can reverberate to other communities, New Jersey, other places, how do you think it will impact them? And what do you both see for the future of this challenge?
I mean, I think there's kind of like two ways to look at it that I think are both pretty hopeful. So I mentioned, an event that I attended this week for Lakeisha Collins Bellamy, and I think, it was a room full of, mostly members of the Jewish community. This is an African-American woman running for city council president in Yonkers, which is the second biggest city in the state of New York. And she told her story of growing up. She had teenage parents, and the high school principal said to her dad, why are you doing this? Your daughter's going to be a statistic. And she went back as city council president to the school where her dad attended. And she said to the principal, I want you to know I am a statistic. I'm the first Black woman to ever be the city council president in Yonkers. And she has this amazing story. Like, she started off in public housing, and then she ultimately went to law school and became a lawyer and worked in the housing authority overseeing the complex where she grew up. Like, amazing story. And she's been a huge ally to the Jewish community. She kind of led the charge on defeating a very one-sided ceasefire resolution and has stood really shoulder to shoulder with us. So I think one kind of like hopeful thing that I take out of, the local organizing is just the importance of, being in community with, different folks of all backgrounds, and how powerful that is, for the Jewish community and for other communities. And I think, like, it's so cheesy, but we are stronger together, and, we're a tiny group of people. And so I think about building, real allyship and alliances, and how important and hopeful that is. So I kind of love that, and to the extent that that's replicable. And then I also think, like, kind of how can we bottle this and, see it replicated? I mean, I think to the extent that the Jewish community can, come together and get registered and participate and, encourage all their neighbors to, I think, political participation is the single most important thing. So, and organizing too, so I would say that's kind of like, to copy and paste it, it would be about, building alliances and supporting our allies, and then, registering and political participation, kind of, yeah. I don't know, what do you do?
Beautiful. Agree. It's been so amazing to watch in real time what has happened post the Westchester Unites campaign. It actually has splintered off. It was funded by Teach NYS, but it has actually splintered off and become its own standalone nonprofit. It's running out of Manhattan right now as Jewish Voters Unites. And I think that we can expect to see many more of these campaigns pop up all across the country. It's sad that October 7th was the impetus. Yeah. It's sad that it kind of was born out of that. But I don't think this is an exclusively Jewish phenomenon. I think that for anyone who feels the need to stand against hate, and there cannot be, we cannot tolerate that coming from anyone in office, and certainly not a congressman or congresswoman. It's been so amazing to see the higher levels of turnout. I don't think that we can end without talking about the New York City race, which is coming up, and I guess we'll see.
I'm so glad you brought that up. So glad I wonder what's happening in New York City.
Right. So my hope moving forward
have they called
is that
you to ask you what's going on?
my hope, you asked what my hope is moving forward. My hope moving forward is that we can drop the slogan of anti-Semitism is on the ballot. It should never be on the ballot. I'm so distraught, and I'm sorry if that's a dramatic word, but truly I'm distraught by this candidate, Mamdani. Sorry, Zoran Mamdani, who is running, who is not secretly anti-Israel, but very publicly, but more importantly, has not made his Jewish constituents feel safe and seen and heard. And so my hope is that we can get to a point where anyone who is running for office, that it is a priority, that everyone feels seen and heard, and most especially their Jewish constituents who are facing unprecedented levels. And we have all the stats here. We're not going to read them out loud. Anyone, go out there and you can find them pretty easily.
Is there a website to find them?
I recommend Google, but we can probably post something after this podcast. But we have never seen the levels of Jew hatred and violence targeted towards Jews in this country, at least not in my lifetime. So it's truly disheartening to see that playing out in the city right now, in Yonkers right now, and my hope is that's really not the rallying cry that brings anyone to the polls, whether they're Jewish or not. It shouldn't be a vote against hatred.
I think that unfortunately, I call them my enemies because of how they act and what they say, but they've been organized for a long time. They've been working at this for about 30 years, at least. And so what we're seeing now is the fruit of their labor. And so we as individuals and as a community have decided to step up and to start working. It's incredible at the success that we all have had, you all have had, from having just began. But it's important, I think, to recognize that this is just the beginning, and that dealing in the political realm is part of it. It's like what we have to deal with right now, but much deeper than that is how people have been sort of indoctrinated with half-truths and lies, and a lot of that comes through social media. And so the political struggle is one of them, but also, but coming back to the K through 12, coming back to the universities, how are people being taught? And social media is kind of playing a big role in that too. And so it's shocking that someone like Mamdani has so much support, but it also shouldn't come as a surprise to us, because this type of indoctrination has been really deeply embedded. And so we have a large challenge in front of us. I'm actually co-founder of something called Emissary for All, and we're actually trying and fight that battle on social media, to try and provide people with a different voice.
That's so important.
Yeah. So
because it feels so lopsided.
Exactly.
I don't know, especially in like far left spaces. It's someone's like, I love bagels, and every single comment is like, globalize the Intifada. And
right.
you're like, you can't, like, it's hard to show up as visibly Jewish or enjoying our food or culture or our religion without.
Let me ask a question. Yeah. How long has that been the case, do you feel?
I mean, I think it's like spiked after October 7th, but if I'm being honest with myself, I think there's been, signs of it, and you saw it, like I said, the Women's March and the women who led that, and
I was shocked.
Yeah.
Linda Sansour.
Yeah.
Sansour. So she wears a hijab, and she is she's a advocate for Sharia law. And am I wrong about that?
I know. Yeah. I mean, I don't know her personally. Yeah.
I'm pretty sure, and that is pretty much anti-feminist.
Yeah.
So okay. How does she become one of the organizers and leaders of the women's movement. To me, it doesn't seem to make any sense.
Yeah, I think there's been a lot of maybe implicit or explicit kind of tolerance of, hatred towards Jews in progressive and far left spaces that was kind of latent and has been building. Yeah.
Well, so glad you guys have engaged in the battle you've engaged with.
Absolutely.
And I want to thank you both for coming. And I
you.
think that there's a lot of positive things in the future. And a lot of it has to do because of the efforts that the both of you have put in. So thank you so much for
Oh
coming.
my gosh.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Yeah.
Thank you, Danielle. Thank you. I think the message, if we just end on a final message, is that it's funny because you talk about it getting so political, but you professionally were in politics, Diana, but I don't view myself as being a political person. I view myself as someone who has the incredible privilege of living in a healthy democracy. So if there's a message I could give to anyone who's listening tonight is to be civically engaged. And people, they shy away and they get really nervous when you say, get political. But it's not about that. It's making sure that your voice is heard. And the only way to do that is to get out and vote.
Yeah, in every election.
In every election, including
And
those local school boards.
And you can Google it on the way in. My husband always calls me, what am I voting for today? And I'm like, okay, breathe. It's the library board. You got this. You can Google it, So, yeah, always vote.
Let's get a high five.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you so much for having us, Danielle.
Thank you.